Thank you for being here today for our 2018 Tupelo Reads program featuring Rick Bragg. Programs like today's, as well as programs for children and young adults, bring to us new perspectives and enjoyment. Each year, well over 1,000 new books, audiobooks, and films are ours to share. And this year, we can boast of new public computers providing access to the digital essentials of email, the pursuit of employment opportunities, and learning games for young children. These are things we enjoy and cherish as part of our vibrant community, but they are not guaranteed. The Friends of the Lee County Library, through their many efforts, whether setting up for a book sale in the library garage, volunteering their time in the Friends Bookshop, the efforts of the Novel Affair Committee, who for the last 4 years have delivered amazing programs featuring culinary artists to sold-out crowds. And yes, to our newest and best friends, our pets who have joined the Friends of the Library. It is thanks to you that we share these plentiful resources. Thank you. And at this time, Friends President Becky Rollins will make a presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. We're always excited as president of the Friends of the Library. If any board members of the Friends of the Library, if you'll stand, please, just want to give you a round of applause. Board members, thank you, Evie. Thank you. Board members, thank you. And if you're a friend of the library, please stand. If you're a friend of the library, if you don't know you're a friend, then you should be one. There you go. There's your friends right there. Thank you so much that you give. And as Jeff said, now you can have your pet become a friend in these cute little bandanas. In the back, you really can't see her with that bright orange girl. Go past that bright orange shirt, and she's waving. You can get your sign up your pet to be a friend of the library. And I have my grand dog has signed up, so look for that picture on Facebook. And then look in your newsletter for any information about that also. We're going to do honorariums for Christmas this year, and Vivian in the back there will have information on that too, so check it out. But without further ado, Jeff, on behalf of the Friends of the Library, I would like to present you a check in the, yes, thank you for the drum roll, in the amount of $40,000, $219.24. I mean, I'm glad we got that 24 cents in there. And as you know, computers for the library and making sure that the library has all their needs. And this is not only from a novel affair, it's from book sales, and it's for things that go around in the library. And as the president of Friends of the Library, I thank you so much for being such a huge support to the library. We really appreciate it. So thank you. And congratulations, Jeff.
Everyone likes a good story. They make us laugh, sometimes cry. They cause us to remember and also to think of our place in the future. The Helen Foster Award for Library Advocacy and Support was created in 2016 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Lee County Library. During those 75 years, much laughter, some tears, I'm sure, but with hopeful expectation, our library has grown. As John Lennon put it, with a little help from our friends. One such friend was Mrs. Helen Foster, a tireless advocate of the library and library board member from 1941 till 1960. Her legacy of support in the form of the Helen Foster Lecture Series calls to mind the importance of hearing each other's stories. And it is the Helen Foster Award that we wish, and it is with the Helen Foster Award that we wish to eliminate stories from within our own community which continue Mrs. Foster's legacy. Please welcome Mrs. Helen Fleming, granddaughter of Helen Foster.
I'm so thrilled that all of y'all are here, and I want to thank you on behalf of my grandmother. The library meant so much to her, and with the help of the Board of Supervisors back many, many years ago, she was able to get the library on its feet, and we're continuing to have that same support thanks to all of you for being here. The library is extremely important to a community. This is Attendance Awareness Month at our schools, and the library is such an important part to our students. And please continue to support this and make it where we have this facility and our bookmobile for our students and for our citizenship from now on. Thank you.
And now to present the 2018 Helen Foster Award is our library board member, Mrs. Sissy Kraft. Sissy.
Jack and Lisa Reed have been longtime supporters and advocates for the Lee County Library. Their involvement as members of the Friends of the Lee County Library, both as advocates and supporters, has resulted in substantial improvements to the quality of life in Lee County. Whether reviewing books at Lunching with Books, such as Walter Isaacson's Leonardo da Vinci, or bringing celebrated authors, the likes of John Meacham, Lisa and Jack epitomize the Tupelo spirit of active involvement to make our community a better place. And of course, Jack and Lisa work to establish Tupelo Reads, One Book, One Community annual program, serving as co-chairs to make this program a truly community-wide benefit. I have known Jack and Lisa on a personal level and a professional level for over 30 years. And I can say, without a doubt in my mind, that Jack and Lisa Reed are godly, selfless people who always put others first. On behalf of the Lee County Library Board of Trustees, I would like to present to you the Helen Foster Award for Library Advocacy and Support.
Thank you so much for that honor. We appreciate it, and we love Sissy dearly. The rest of you too. But we've known Sissy for years, so it means a lot coming from her. Jack and I are lucky to have grown up with libraries. My parents took me in Birmingham and he in Tupelo, and then we took our children. So we always think of the library as sort of being the center of intellectual things in a community. And so from that, Tupelo Reads was really born, and it was an idea of sort of the library being a center of lifelong learning and a way to kind of move out from there to a community reading program, a one city, one book sort of thing. We'd seen it done in other cities, so we thought it could be done here as well. And it has been a team effort in every way, not just us, and we've gotten along pretty well for 8 years in doing this, but we have a dream team committee that has helped to draw the circle wider and wider with everything in the schools that has been done, and fantastic art show, the party at Romy's last night, which was sold out. Just every single thing we do, they have done. And a lot of them have been under contract for 8 years, and the pay is great, as you can imagine. But they're stellar and have really helped us make it a reality. So we're most appreciative of them. And then let me just put in a little plug. If you value programs like this, I know we've done the Friends too, but to get stellar people such as Rick Bragg, there is a fund at Create, a 501c3 that is for Tupelo Reads, so it helps us keep bringing great talent to Tupelo. So it's there if anybody feels so inclined. It's helped us. We don't really have a fundraiser. We just sort of do the things, and volunteers do the labor. So that's how it all gets done. But we could not have a community reading program without the community. So thank you so much for participating and making it happen by your presence and by reading the book and being part of a citywide conversation. And we're most appreciative of this award. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Of course, I echo what Lisa said. This is going to save about 5 minutes because the first 5 minutes of my remarks were going to be how underappreciated I feel, and this was going to be, this was going to be my last rodeo, and somebody else could do all the work now. But I guess I'll skip that part. No, of course I'm kidding about that. But God, what a great crowd! I mean, the balcony. Honestly, some of you may not. I still keep my eyes on City Hall, if not my influence. But I think we are lucky that Tupelo is hosting all the fire departments in the state yesterday and today for a conference. Grenada Fire Department, the Biloxi Fire Department, they're all here. And apparently our fire department is there hosting, so they are not here to enforce the attendance code, which they said, Rick, after the John Grisham meeting, that there would be no more people in the balcony at these meetings. So we won't tell Chief Walker about our overflow crowd. But God, what a great crowd. Thank you. We had a wonderful hour at Tupelo High School. I wish every one of y'all could have been there. I guess you could have been there. There was room at the Arts Center, Performing Arts Center, but it was just terrific listening to Rick talk to these high school students, and inspirational, really, and just terrific. So, Rick, thank you for already doing the first act of today's show. I also want to thank, in addition to to what Lisa said, obviously the people on the committee, the Friends, the City of Tupelo, which does provide some funding still for the Tupelo Reads program, and the Gumtree Bookstore for our 8th edition. What a treat we have cooked up for you today. Since Rick Bragg burst upon the scene in 1987 and he first stepped into our bookstore, now 31 years ago, we Tupeloans and readers in our region have been privileged to devour his books. Beginning with All Over But the Shouting, we were served more courses of his family and Ava's Man and the Prince of Frogtown. I ate up his book on Jerry Lee Lewis, The Killer. I read it so fast, Rick, it could have been served out of a microwave. Of course, he won his Pulitzer Prize for his well-seasoned reporting of newspaper accounts all over the world. He has won more than 40 awards for his writing, but probably you will be the first public group to know, other than the group at the Southern Booksellers Conference last week, that he was just awarded 4 days ago the Pat Conroy Legacy Award, which is a really prestigious prize. And if any of us who know Rick's work would not be surprised at that, of course. His newest bestseller, Rick writes in his prologue, and I know so many of y'all have read it because you've told me over the summer how many of the people in the city have been reading the citywide book. Quote, I guess you would call it a food memoir, but it's really just a cookbook told the way we tell everything with a certain amount of meandering. Close quote. Well, it is a meal for our heart, our mind, and our soul. It has delightful humor. For example, this was one of my favorite passages. He was talking to his mama in this exchange, and she said, well, what would you call it, of a cookbook on her food? And he said, the best cook in the world, I said. She said, I wasn't even the best cook that lived on our road. Your Aunt Edna was a fine cook. Our mama was a fine cook. And Rick said, well, Mama, we couldn't call it the third best cook on the Roy Webb Road. I just wouldn't sing. So that's just typical of just so much of the book. But it does have a purpose, and I thought this was so timely when I read this particular part of the book, so timely for us today, and you all will know what I'm talking about when I read it. He said, quote, in a South that no longer seems to remember its heart, our food may be the best part left. It is a thing that binds us more than it shoves us apart from each other and the rest of the world, close quote. It is rich in wonderful writing from the first chapter in 1924 to the last chapter of 2017. Who else can write about something we know so well, so commonplace, but yet universal truths that inspire us. Like these three sentences from the final chapter. Quote, an old person gets a little tired sometimes living in the past, so deep into the past, even if it tastes so good. But the garden is different. The garden is about the future and hope and plans, close quote. That's pure Rick Bragg poetry. So please help me welcome back to Tupelo and back to the Lee County Library, the world's best meanderer, our friend Rick Bragg.
Jack, could we just go on the road? If you could do that you wouldn't miss him, would you? Somehow I didn't think so. Thank you. That means a lot to me. It's also, without any exaggeration, one of the most elegant introductions I've ever had. Usually you sit there thinking, they pulled that right off the internet. And the bad thing is they pulled it off, from 1996. And people walk up to me and say, well, how do you like working for the Birmingham News? And thank you. I mean it. I appreciate it. I've said this before. I'd rather talk with you than talk at you. And so we're going to take some time a lot of time for questions. Everybody that has a really, really good question. I said this earlier today, and the kids were so disappointed. I said, everybody that asks a question gets $10. And the hands just shot up. And they were so disappointed when they found out I was just a bald-faced liar. But children scare me. Do they scare y'all? They frighten me. I don't understand them. You know what I mean? I don't get it. I just don't. They frighten me. I don't understand why they want to wear their pants that way. And I told the young man, true story, I told the young man, I said, if you'll just wait till you get my age, your pants will hang like that anyway. But all kidding aside, and it's not my place to tell y'all what a good city you live in. But the fact is, and I don't have to say that because you showed up anyway, so it's nothing to be gained. But you have such a good school, and you have such a beautiful and almost imposing library. It's just such a nice treat to come in a time where so many places are hammering at the budgets of, what do we need? Well, we need to be smarter. We need to read so we can continue to be smarter and informed. We need to have good schools. We need those things. We need libraries and we need schools, and often those are the first things people think about when it comes time to trim back. So it is nice to be in a place that has shoved a big hobnail boot in the door to keep that from happening. And what a great pleasure. Thank y'all for inviting me. I don't read a lot from this book because I've been to readings, and Jack, I know you have in your craft. I've been to readings where, the author pulls out his book and he starts reading out loud. And, you'd think a fellow couldn't write that much about the Crimean War. It happens a lot with Civil War historians, they just keep it going and they keep it going. And even the most ergonomically designed chair in the world, when your behind goes numb, it's time to stop reading. You know what I mean? When you look out there and people are looking like, I'd rather be anywhere but here, But I do want to read you. Just about 2 paragraphs, but they're big ones. but they're just 2 paragraphs. It's less than a page and a little bit, which is the way my mama cooks. She has never, ever had a mathematical table for cooking. So let me just read you kind of why I thought this was important. And I bet it's your people, too. I bet there's not a nickel's worth of difference between these people and your people. Mississippi is a funny place. Because I cross the state line, and I don't know I've done it. I know y'all might look down on us. But you cross the state line and you don't I fly into some places and I think, oh God, I need my passport. Or they're going to stop and question me at the border. But no, I just glided right on across, coming in here. But this is why I think this was worth doing. When I did my first book, they sent me to Manhattan to teach me how to read out loud. I'm not kidding. I guess they thought that since I was from the great sovereign state of Alabama, that I did not know how to read my own work out loud. I guess they thought I just told it to somebody and they typed it in. And so I'm sitting there, and this really sweet lady is saying, "Now, whatever happens, Rick, don't flip disconcertingly through the book in front of a large group of people." And I was thinking, and I'm nodding my head, like Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies. But the whole time it's happening, I'm thinking, well, how in the hell do you get from one place to another in a book without flipping through it? I mean, did Faulkner just point to his book? It just popped open? Or did Hemingway pour a shot and raise it and his book just opened up? But I digress. First time I came here, I didn't need these. And I could probably stand up for longer than an hour at a time, too. Right. Well, this is why I thought it was worthwhile. Since she was 11 years old, even if all she had to work with was neck bones, pepper grass, or poke salad, she put good food on a plate. She cooked for dead broke uncles, hungover brothers, shade tree mechanics, faith healers, dice shooters, hairdressers, pipe fitters, crop dusters, high steel walkers, and deep well diggers. She cooked for iron workers, Avon ladies, highway patrolmen, sweatshop seamstresses, fortune tellers, coal haulers, dirt track daredevils, and dime store girls. She cooked for lost souls stumbling home from Aunt Hattie's beer joint, and for singing cowboys on the AM radio. She cooked in her first 80 years more than 70,000 meals, as basic as hot butter biscuits with pear preserves or muscadine jelly, as exotic as tender braised beef tripe and white milk gravy, in kitchens where the only ventilation was the banging of a screen door. She cooked for people she just as soon poisoned. And for the loves of her life. She cooked for the rich ladies in town, melting beef short ribs into potatoes and hot Spanish onions, another woman's baby on her hip. Then sleepwalked home to feed her own boys home-canned blackberries dusted with sugar as a late-night snack. She pan-fried chicken in Red's barbecue with a crust so crisp and thin it was mostly in the imagination. And deep-fried fresh brim and crappie and hush puppies redolent with green onion and government cheese. She seasoned pinto beans with ham bone and baked crackling cornbread for old women who tugged a pick sack, and stewed fat spare ribs in creamy butter beans that truck drivers would brag on 3,000 miles from home. She spiked collard greens with cane sugar and hot pepper for old men who fought the Hun on the Hindenburg line, and simmered chicken and dumplings for mill workers with cotton lint still stuck in their hair. She fried thin apple pies in white butter and cinnamon for pretty young women with bus tickets out of this one-horse town, and baked sweet potato cobbler for the grimy pipe fitters and dusty bricklayers that they left behind. She cooked for big-haired waitresses at the Fuzzy Duck Lounge, shiny-eyed pilgrims at the Congregational Holiness Campground, and crew-cut teenage boys who read comic books beside her banana pudding, then embarked for Vietnam. She cooked, most of all, to make it taste good, to make every chip melamine plate a poor man's banquet, because how do you serve dull food to a people such as this? She became famous for it, became the best cook in the world, if the world ends just this side of Cedartown. But she never used a cookbook, not in her whole life. She never cooked from a written recipe of any kind and never wrote down one of her own. She cooked with ghosts at her sure right hand, and you can believe that or not. The people who taught her the secrets of Southern blue-collar cooking are all gone now, and they did not cook from a book either. Most of them did not know how to read and write. Every time the old woman stepped from her workshop of steel spoons, iron skillets, and blackened pots, all she knew about the food left with her, in the way that when a bird flies off a wire, it just leaves a black line on the sky. Thank y'all. I appreciate it. It was probably one of the best. I almost said one of the best things I ever did, but it was one of the best efforts I ever had in doing it, because I got to sit beside my mom and listen to her talk. Not so much about the cooking, because that we were going to get that. You know, I did know a lot of that. You know, I did know a lot. Like, for instance, pinto beans and ham. If you're going to have pinto beans and ham, you don't skimp on the ham unless you have to. If the only pork you have for seasoning is the size of a matchbox, you can still make magic with it. But what if you got a big old ham? What if times have got better? What if, say, it's Thanksgiving? We have pinto beans every Thanksgiving. And you take the big ham and you cut all the skin and all the fat, leaving some lean on as you cut. Be generous with your cut. And you cut all the fat and all the skin off that ham. But you don't throw it away. And then you slice sandwich meat or big ham steaks off the ham till you get down to where you've got a skinny ham. You know, so you've trimmed him from the outside, and now you've got him down to that skinny ham that some people call a ham bone. And you put that in 2 pounds of pinto beans with 1 onion, 1 whole peeled onion, just the right amount of salt, but not yet pepper. You know, because you don't dump that pepper in there and let it just cook and cook and cook and cook. You know, and there are other little secrets that, you know, maybe a tiny little bit of sugar, maybe, but mostly it's just pork and ham. I mean, pork and beans. And, you know, could I eat it every day of my life? Yes, for the 17 days I would live after I started eating. But how do you get those? The book started with the stories. And there's always food attached to a story. I don't know if y'all do it over here in this exotic land, but in Alabama, we date from food. Well, that was when we made all them peanut butter cookies. Or I don't know if you remember or not, but that's when John cooked those 2 whole hogs. Not spinning like they do in North Carolina, but butchered and laid out on a pit as long as this library with, I don't know how poor people could afford to eat like that, but, ribs and ham steaks and fresh pork chops, all slow smoking on that low pit that's dug half into the ground, and 1 row of cinder blocks and grates from construction laid across it for your cooking surface. Homemade sauce shook up in a mayonnaise jar. Wasn't no mayonnaise in it, but never throw away a mayonnaise jar. But we went with the stories first, and the great stories were, and we said it today talking to the kids, and I apologize for Jack having to hear it twice, y'all, but chicken and dressing. Chicken and dressing doesn't mean what it means in other places. Homemade chicken and dressing means that you smell it coming up the driveway, and you take the steel spoon from the time of the Spanish-American War, because that's what your mama uses in her kitchen, and it sits right beside the butcher knife that is black with age, and so thin it's like paper. And the point got clipped off a long time ago, but she ain't going to stab nothing with it. She doesn't need the point. Not that she didn't consider it back when my daddy was alive. But you take that spoon and you push it into the top of that dressing, and that dressing has a sheen on the top. It's in an iron skillet, and it's got a sheen on the top. And that sheen is butter and chicken fat. And not one other thing. The sage and the onion and all those. And you don't kill it with sage. The great mistake in dressing is when you just kill it with sage. But that sage and that onion and maybe a little celery, all that is in that creamy underneath. But on top, that chicken fat has from that dark meat chicken cooked with the skin on. She would boil the chicken. Now, I've seen people on television skimming the chicken fat off. What is wrong with those people? But she would boil dark meat pieces, let them cool just a little bit, break them apart, and then she would, of course she used the chicken broth in the dressing, but she would gently mix those big hunks of chicken into the body of the dressing. Now, some people would push them into the dressing about halfway down and have whole pieces, and that is a pretty dish, but Mama believes that dries out. And it won't dry out if it's kind of preambulating down there in the, I don't think that's a word, but we're going to use it. And so that when you take that spoon and you push it in there, it makes a sound, this sound right here. Ch, ch, like creme brulee makes. Y'all know what I mean? Like ch. So you got a crispy, it's crispy around the skillet, and it's crispy on top, but a different kind of crispy. But underneath, it is smooth. And I described it once as like pudding made in hell. And I still don't know why I said that, but she has not forgiven me. But what I meant was, it's not sweet, it's savory, and it's, just the right amount of everything, which for Southerners means maybe just a little bit too much, But I asked her, I said, Mama, where did this come from? Which is, the book. Where did this come from? She said, oh, hon, that goes back to that time that your cousin Sis Morrison shot her husband in the teeth. Really? I see your disbelief. But he was mean man, and he had threatened to, well, he didn't threaten, he actually had put hands on her one time, and she said, if you ever do that again, I'll kill you. And so they were at the supper table. And he drew his hand back, and she said, if you do that, I'll kill you. He said, how? And she said, I'll shoot you. And he said, did you say you'd shoot me? And she said, I will shoot you. And he said, no, you won't. So she shot him. And she drew from her apron pocket and it's so nice to be in a gun-bearing state where I don't have to, where I don't have to explain this. She drew a snub-nosed .22 pistol from her apron pocket, fake pearl handles, and sawed-off snub-nose, and fired at his face. And he turned. He was snarling, and he turned like this right here, and at just the right moment, the bullet blew all his front teeth out. So I asked, my mom and my Aunt Gracie Juanita, who is 87 and about 4'2". I asked them, I said, my mom is almost 6 feet tall. She's my size, but spare. And I said, well, yeah, I was hopeful. I was hoping, they were false teeth. And my Aunt Juanita said, oh, Lord, no, hon, they were in his head. And I said, like I'm prone to ask in stories about family that involve shootings, and there are unfortunately more than we would like to believe, oh, don't act like y'all ain't got the same. Don't act like every damn one of you doesn't have exactly the same. Only it's like a big toe instead of teeth or something. But he had big snaggle teeth, and they irritated her, which is why she chose to shoot him in the teeth. And I said, what happened then? My mama said, and I love this phrase. This is like my favorite phrase. Sis went on the lam. When'd she come back? Because I'd known her all my life, until she passed away. And Mom said, well, she got to worrying about him, and her and Ruby went in the hospital. And there is the only thing in the book I'm not 100% sure of was whether or not one was sneaking ahead of the other one in the hospital so as not to get caught. Because they didn't file no charges were filed. And so they were like, she and her daughter Ruby were in the hospital, and one of them saw, they were looking in, they didn't want to go to the front desk and say, hey, I shot my husband's teeth out, where is he? So they went, they were going down the hallway, and they just look in every, you know how small hospitals are, they just looked in every room. Just opened the door up and looked in there. And one of them peeked in one room, and there he is. There he is. He's right in there. The other one said, how do you know? And I said, they've got them damned old teeth in a water glass in there. I'd recognize them damned old teeth anywhere. So how could you not have fun, doing that? And people have told me that it is a gentler book than some of the others. There's a great deal of sadness in some of the other books on family, and this is probably, while there is like sadness in it, and there's funeral food, and and there's all kind of loss in Southern families. It's not always death. Sometimes, especially back during the Depression, people just left. They just left. They crawled up on a freight train and disappeared, or they wandered off one day because the conditions of the surroundings required it. And so there's loss in it, but there's not as much in this book. It's gentler on the heart, I hope. So if you don't like it, Jack is offering everybody triple their money back.
That's a safe bet, I think.
But these are the reasons why we did it. It all goes back. People always ask, where do your recipes go back to? They don't go back to a sweet old woman in her kitchen. They go back to a bitter, mean, nasty old felon. My great-grandfather, Jimmy Jim Bunner, who originated many of these recipes on chain gang shacks, cooking for chain gangs, and in logging crews, where the guys can't come down off the mountain. So, he made pinto beans and ham for 40. He made fried chicken gizzards and livers for a small army. And, he made biscuits for a battleship. He's good at it. Because those men would kill you if you didn't feed them right. And I'm not exaggerating. You want to cause a riot on a logging camp? Give somebody a cold biscuit and a plate of pork and beans and see what happens. But my grandfather married my grandma Ava under false pretenses. Ava could not cook. And her sisters, and I hinted at this in Ava's Man, cooked a box supper, a phony box supper, and sent it with her to sit on the stage. I know y'all had a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And they had but the young women of marriageable age, which was probably around 14 then, but went to sit on the stage, but Ava was getting long in the tooth. She was knocking on 17. And she was, and they sit there with this box of it's almost always chicken, fried chicken, pie, biscuits, something portable, And they would sit there, and the young men, and this is at a dance, the young men would bid. And he bid think about this, in the 20s. He bid a whole $1 because he thought she was really beautiful. And he bid a whole $1, and because we're real progressive people, that's how our courtship rituals go. But it was a lie. Her sisters, she was mouthy and hard to get along with, and they wanted her out of the house. So they... but it was all a lie. And they got married, and she proceeded to starve him. And she made biscuits and cornbread that rose to the height of a vanilla wafer. Now think about this for a minute. What is one of the great delicacies of our people? Vegetable soup, right? Vegetable soup, beef stock, potatoes and onions and carrots, maybe a can of English peas, green beans, corn, but it's the spices that make it come alive. It's the seasonings. Even if it's just salt and pepper, but it's just the right amount of seasoning. And if you got a little cayenne pepper, if you got maybe just a little dab of chili powder, think of the magic you can make. Y'all all got better vegetable soup recipes than we do. But she just opened cans and put it in, and then took a can of tomato juice and put it in there and boiled it, and then gave it to him. And, you know, he dug wells. He roofed houses. He swung a hammer. You can't feed a man like that. So he began to waste away. And he imported women. No, not like you think. That would be the generations to follow. But he imported women who, old, you know, cooks who knew everything. You know, who knew everything. Who could take cornmeal and a little bit of chicken or even squirrel or rabbit broth and slowly ease that cool mixture of cornmeal and water into that broth and get a porridge, basically. You know, but cook it with a skillet of fried cabbage. You know, you got the porridge in one pot, and then you like fry a skillet of good fried cabbage with bacon grease, you know, and you don't cook it to mush, and you don't cook it not enough. You cook it just right so that the fork meets just a little bit of resistance when it goes in there. But if you cook it to mush, it's still good, but not cooked enough is sacrilege for Southern cooks. So, you know, those were the kind of cooks who came in to teach her, and she ran all of them off. She threatened them with physical harm, and ran them off. My grandma had early onset dementia, but she kept it at bay. She kept it at bay almost all her life, and it only got her. It only got her at the end. She still babysat me when she was in her 60s. And, you know, going on into her 70s. And she would go a little peculiar sometimes, but she still fried me whole boneyards full of chicken. Made me tea cakes and hung them on a nail, you know, in the kitchen. You just walk by and get them out of the flour sack. They'd still be warm. And when they ran out, she'd cook some more. And, but she couldn't do any of that back then. And she was not going to learn. Because she didn't think she had to learn. Because she was that big. She was that big around and that big. And she did not want to eat. She didn't like to eat. Saw no purpose in it. Except to stay alive. She's, you know, y'all know people like that. They just don't eat. They just, oh, I forgot to eat. Who in the hell forgets to eat? I have never once in my life, not once in my life, said, you know, I just forgot to eat. Have you ever forgot to eat? So no, we don't forget to eat unless we're in a war, you know. And so he thought, finally, who do I know who's mean enough, yet is a great cook, that can tolerate her, maybe even teach her? And he thought of his daddy. His daddy, a universally regarded fine cook. But he didn't know exactly where he was, because he'd been involved in the cutting death of a man and had fled the state to North Georgia, which is not as bad as it seems. Sometimes in gentler crowds, I will fudge a bit and say that he was said to have been involved. But we're pretty sure. But anyway, he moved to North Georgia, to those high mountains. We live in the foothills of the Appalachians. We live in these mountains. They live in those mountains. And them mountain people are different. I mean, they're different. We consider ourselves mountain people. We are not mountain people. You know. And those old boys were different. They still earmark their hogs, and they still, boy, you'd see a whiskey fire every 10 miles, you know, and he fled up there and just, you know, fished, hunted, trapped, you know, got a little cornmeal and lived. I don't know for how long, but a good while. And when my grandfather realized that he could no longer sustain his body on what he was eating, he got on a gray mule. My mama wanted me to be sure I said it was the gray mule. He got on a gray mule, rode into the mountains of North Georgia, and rode up, found his daddy by asking at every still, not every still, but at every like hog pen, saying, "Have you seen this man?" And that in itself was risky. And he finally tracked him down kind of by accident, and he sees the old man sharpening a lemon axe. Do y'all know what a lemon axe is? That's that light axe that you used to cut limbs when you're pulpwooding back in the old day. And now you just touch the saw to them. In the old days, there was a special little light axe, real sharp. And that old man was always sharpening something. He just liked blades. And he was sharp, and he sees. And imagine the scene. Here he is in this clearing, cold campfire, lean to, and up rides his boy that he hadn't seen in forever. And he comes riding up, and he looks up, and he says to his boy, "You look like you've wasted to nothing." And his boy, my grandfather, said, and this is my favorite quote in the whole book, "I reckon I do, Daddy, for I have married a pretty woman who cannot cook, and she is starving me to death." So the old man got on the back of the mule the next morning, and we had food. And I could go on and on and on and on, but we had food. And he taught my grandma, and my grandma threatened to kill him, and once threatened to push him down a well, and went looking for the well to push him down. But she never did, and they actually became close, became best friends, and he taught her everything he knew, and then she taught my mother everything that she knew. But my mother also learned from other great cooks. So this is where the recipes go back to the Civil War. And some of them, like that broth recipe, go back to the Creek and the Cherokee. So it's what this thing is about. And right now, why don't we take some questions, and I will tell hopefully some truths, and we'll go from there. And you shut me up, Jack, when it's time to. He don't mind doing that. He runs these things like Mussolini ran trains.
Give a mic.
Oh yeah, well we're sophisticated.
Yeah.
Usually I just tell people they have to yell. Well, ask me a question so I won't feel bad. See, look, here's a nice lady over here.
I'm not going that far.
No.
Oh, me?
I'll go.
Okay, hey. I've been wanting to tell you this for the longest time. I work with teachers in schools all around the state. And last year I was in a 6th grade classroom, and what I was going to do was have them write about somebody. And I used the opening paragraph from Ava's Man.
Oh, thank you.
She was old,
She was
all,
old
my,
all
life.
my life, yeah.
And we read it first together, and we took it apart, and then I told them we're going to use what the greats do and imitate them. So it was flattery. But they put out some of the best writing for those little 6th graders. And I wanted you to know that your work is so special to me for so many reasons. I'm from the mountains in West Virginia.
Oh,
so
same people.
Same people.
Same people.
So I always connect with you on so many levels with that, but when I got to share that with students and help them become a little bit more of a writer, that was real special.
Oh,
so
bless your
heart. I've been wanting to tell you that.
Thank you. It's my memory is about shot, but I remember the first page of every book I ever wrote, and I was so happy to do that. I did that book because I wanted to make me a grandfather. And that is the reason. But when you hear something like that as a writer, it makes you very, very, very proud of what you do. Thank you. As opposed to somebody telling you something that makes you go, oh, why in the hell did I write that? Yes, ma'am.
Has your mama allowed you to build her a beautiful new modern kitchen, or does she want to stick to the same old, same old?
she is. I was in Fairhope, Alabama, in an antique store, and I found 3 iron skillets. They looked like really good iron skillets to me. They were very expensive. Iron skillets are expensive. So I knew she'd been saying she wanted an iron skillet. She wanted a practical. She had iron skillets. She had a big skillet for cornbread and dressing and chicken. And then she had a smaller skillet for when she was just making cornbread for a couple of people and for eggs. So I found, and they looked just like hers, and they were good quality iron skillets, but they didn't look right, she said. And they hadn't been seasoned right, and they made the cornbread stick, which means she had to give it to the dogs. So I can't even buy her a skillet. Somebody sent her in the mail a little bitty tiny iron skillet, but it's real. It's like real. And that became like her prized possession. And I said, well, why? If you want something you can't cook in, why don't you use those big ones I bought you? So she'll probably pawn those I gave her off on her sisters. But no, she's got knives that predate me. She has, the only time that the knives, she will allow me to get her a knife is when the wood handles just disintegrate. She still cuts okra with a little old steak knife that has been sharpened. It's got a broke point too. And it has been sharpened to the width of the cellophane on a pack of cigarettes. I mean, think how wickedly sharp that is. So no, ma'am, she does. If the Food Network, which she thinks is basically lying, if the Food Network came in and built her a new kitchen, she would refuse to cook in it. She has a little kitchen with I bought Momma. One of the nice things I've been able to do with the books is, I got her one house, and she didn't like it. As a 4-bedroom brick house on a hill, why should she like that? Central heat and air, beautiful wooded backyard. Why would she like that? So she didn't like it because, quote, it has too many light bulbs, unquote. So, Momma won't ask for anything. If she asked me for a Ferrari with a gold monkey strapped into the passenger seat, I would go get her one. But she doesn't ask for anything. But one day, after she'd informed me about the too many light bulb situation, she was looking at a real estate magazine, and she had folded over a page, and that page was of a 40-acre farm in the foothills of the Appalachians with a red cedar cabin. And it sounds very rustic and romantic, but it was one of those California cedar cabins. But it wasn't real big. It was only like a bedroom here, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen, and a big old stone fireplace. And it just reminded her of some of the places they had grown up in. Not nearly that nice. But so I had just sold another book. So I thought I sure would like to go marlin fishing off the coast of Costa Rica. But instead, I got her a farm. And then I told her, you have to like this one. And I don't give a damn how many light bulbs it has. You have to like this one. And she is very happy. She has 40 acres of pasture. She has livestock. You know, she has miniature donkeys. If you've ever seen a miniature donkey, I bought her 2 miniature donkeys. I didn't ask how much they cost. You know, until I just figured if a regular donkey you can get for $75. Because I'm very intelligent. Then I thought a miniature donkey you'd be able to get for half of that. And the guy got him down in Fairhope, and that should have warned me. And the guy, sweet man, pulled up with his trailer, opened the gate, and 2 little miniature donkeys pranced out. And one of them ran around behind me and bit me on the leader behind my back leg, you know that ligament back there, and would not turn loose. What do I do? What do I do? He said, bust him one. I said, I can't hit my mama's donkey. He turned loose after what seemed like an hour. Then the female ate the sleeve off my coat. I am not kidding. They will eat anything. They're like goats. They will eat anything. They ate all the webbing off 2 lawn chairs. Ate every bit of it. We put a tarp up while we were working on the shed, you know, the barn stall for them to get into. They ate the tarp. They pulled the tarp off the crossbeam and ate part of the tarp. They're mostly polyester on the inside. But I digress. No, ma'am, she does not want to fancy anything. She is happy, I hope. I hope she's happy with what she has. And
I have 2 things. I saw you on public.
where is that voice coming from? Oh. Hop up. Hop. No. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 things. I saw you on public television commenting on Harper Lee.
Yes, ma'am.
You're a very important person.
Nah.
And the other thing is my favorite line from your books. Charlie had passed away, and they asked Ava, I'll get it right.
That's all right.
They asked Ava why she had not married, why she had not gotten another man. And Ava said, I had me one.
Yeah.
My favorite line.
That is, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Well, my grandfather was as many men are. Well, let's just try a little test. How many of you ladies married a Southern man? How many of you feel like you got a good one? How many of you are lying in front of God and everybody? But my grandpa was he had him a girlfriend at one point named Blackie Lee. She was a city woman. My grandmother was away picking cotton. It's too far to come home, so they would spend the night. And Blackie, he thought he was being clever. So he moved her in for a night or two, and my grandma was picking in the field, and one of her friends picked up beside her and said, Ava, when did you get you some silk stockings? Because I rode by your house and I saw a pair of silk stockings on the line. And she just whipped the bag off over her head and walked home. And she beat that woman through the house. My Aunt Juanita was the oldest girl, and she said, Mama beat her out of the bedroom, out of the back room, beat her through the house, beat her down the steps, beat her out into the yard, beat her to the edge of the road, beat her so hard that her hands swelled up so big they wouldn't fit in her apron pockets. Beat her, and then flagged a car down. And think how hard that is to do on a dirt road. Flagged a car down, threw her in the passenger seat and said, "Get her out of here." And then when he came home, picture a little bitty tiny woman beating the hell out of a big old man. And that was it for that kind of behavior. That was it. And she forgave him. And they fought. They fought. She could nag paint off a wall. And they fought and fought and fought and fought. And he drank and drank and drank and drank. He made whiskey. But he worked. He drank and laughed. He drank and worked. He would stagger across the roof line on a house, bundle of shingles, It just, holding a bundle of shingles and a claw and a roofing hatchet. But he was that legendary kind of Southern man, this big around, this tall, had hands that looked like a baseball mitt. I got 13-year-old girl hands. And he fought men. He adopted a little simple-minded man named Hootie, named Jesse Kleins. They named him Hootie. And he just adopted him because people were beating him for sport. So he took him home and basically cared for him for years, decades. And he had some unfortunate incidents. There was that stint in prison in Atlanta. And then there was the unfortunate time he shot one of the Reardon boys' girlfriends through both bosoms with a shotgun. But she was trying to stab him with a butcher knife. They were laying for him in the yard. And he had a Belgian 410, not a 12, but a little 410 shotgun. And they came out of the dark at him. And he knocked one flat, and then he saw this big figure moving at him out of the darkness, and he turned and fired. And my Aunt Juanita said, and Hun shot her through both bosoms. It was a little slug, little lead slug. And I, said, well, did it kill her? And my Aunt Juanita said, Lord, no, Hun, they were that big. But I digress. The whole reason I did that book was to discover my grandfather. He was flawed. He was very flawed. But he could noodle, not for a catfish, but for a snapping turtle. And he would see one go up under the bank, and he would very gently feel. And they'll cut your thumb off. They'll bite your thumb off. And he would feel like that. And if he could ever feel the shell, you can tell from the carapace on the big snapper. You know what I mean? The flute. And if you run your finger up and you hit that point, then you're going toward his head. But if you can feel, if you can get the tail. If you can get the tail and you can hold on, you can just drag them out of the water and kill them on the bank. But imagine the guts it takes. And there's the recipe for turtle stew. Now, we're talking about the 20s, But the recipe for turtle stew is something that A lot of people have said they tried, which surprises me because I know, you can get turtle. It ain't that hard, but you can't go to A&P and get it. Unless y'all got a much better A&P over here than we did. But thank you. Thank you. Someone else? Yes, sir.
We talked a little bit when you were coming in, and I worked in newspapers, and one of my favorite things to do in the mornings was to get my cup of coffee and go through the New York Times and look for Rick Bragg headlines. And I devoured your stories and shamelessly imitated you as much as possible.
Good.
One of the greatest compliments of my life was this perfect stranger was talking to me about a story that I wrote, and he said, you reminded me so much of Rick Bragg. Have you ever heard of him? And I about fell over. But anyway, all that to say, we were talking about this earlier, but do you ever miss it? I mean, do you miss the newspaper work and consider ever going back to something like that? Obviously, you don't have to, but...
Well, thank you, first of all. And the moment that they said that about you, you should have immediately said, who? But thank you. I'll be honest. I'll be sometimes late at night. I don't sleep good, so I stay up real late, and I'll read and I'll watch a little something on TV. And I'm not one of those writers who puffs his chest out and says I never watch TV. I've watched every movie on what's that old movie channel? TN Turner Classic. I've seen every movie on Turner Classic, but sometimes I'll go to sleep with the television on, and I'll wake up and I'll see that something in the world has happened. And the first thing that goes through my head is, still after all these years, how do I get there? How do I get there? What are the connections to get there? What's the status of my passport? Or just how do I rent a car there? Do they have a car rental? Because I did it so long and was proud to do it. And then the second thing that goes through my mind is, you don't get to go. And then the third thing, real quick, is you don't have to. And I think I wrote so much about killing and dying over time that this is not meant to sound dramatic. It is truly not. I wrote so much about that stuff over the years that it really does leave you with not a numb feeling, but a weary feeling. And I don't really want to ever see another broken-hearted mother that I have bothered. I don't want to ever have to do that again. And that was the part that I considered the best part of what we did, was putting a human face on suffering and tragedy. I do sometimes miss. I miss the sports. Because I was a sports writer for quite some time, and on a Friday night, you hate it and you love it. You sit in a press box on a plastic bucket or I sat on a 2x4 one time, and you race back. You ain't had nothing to eat unless you were able to choke down a hot dog in the stadium, and you run back and you write it, and you got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to write, and you try to put some poetry in it, and I never was very good at that, but I do miss that. I don't miss covering college. When I was covering college sports, we had Bear Bryant, and people would call in and they would, gripe at people about, when Bryant retired, they'd call in and just dog cuss the new coach. And one time the coach had gone for a tie instead of the win, and somebody called in. I was driving back, to the office, and the caller called the call-in show. This was years and years and years before Feinbaum. And everybody had a call-in show. And the caller said, I got something to say to all these people who've been calling in dog cussing Alabama's coach for not going for 2 there. I want you to know that if Bear Bryant was still alive, he would have kicked that extra point 2. And then there's this silence. Then he said, of course, he'd have been ahead 45-0 when he did it. And now, you know, I interviewed Saban for Sports Illustrated, wrote a story when he came there about I knew then it was going to be a return to power. He's a scary little man. I mean, I didn't
tell us that.
Huh?
You don't have to tell us that.
Well, Nick wanted me, because, you know, we talk every day. He wanted me to apologize for all that. He kept telling them, just fumble. But we got pride, and we wouldn't do it. But I did a talk in Athens, and I began the talk by saying, first of all, I'd just like to say that I talked with Nick, and he agrees about the bad calls, and your championship trophy will be shipped to you. And do you believe nobody thought that was funny? But yeah, it's kind of nice being an Alabama football fan, but covering Nick, no thank you. I don't want to have any hide peeled off of me at this point in my life. I need it all. But thank you. Yeah, I think about it all the time. I still read newspapers. I think that the democracy cannot sustain itself if we don't have print media. All right. Mussolini here has said we can take one more.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey. You said the knives, you said the skillets, we've got the book with recipes. What about her aprons? Wear aprons, wear tablecloths, wear napkins. Those are my favorites.
To be brutally honest.
Please tell me you didn't sell them in a yard sale.
No.
Okay.
To be brutally honest, she only puts on an apron when somebody is coming from a magazine to take her picture. She does. If it's a wet ingredient, she will use a dishcloth, what we call a dishcloth. But, dry? It's just real quick, like that. And, but when she's getting her picture made, she puts on an apron. And I told her, I said, you are the least phony person that I know. Why in the world do you put on an apron? And she said, well, hon, they just think I'm supposed to have one on. I'm a little old lady, and they just think I'm supposed to have an apron. And I told her, I said, well, if you're going to have an apron, you should wear it, hike it up and tie it up against your neck, because where she gets stuff on her is not in the kitchen. Even now, she can't see. Even now, she doesn't. It is amazing how little mess she makes as she prepares food. And I cook a skillet of anything, and there is grease everywhere. She can cook a skillet full of fried eggs in the grease from Fatback. And I guess she gets it as it comes. When it pops, I guess she gets it. But her... I told her, I said, you need to wear an apron all the time because she still dips Bruton snuff. I know. You don't have to tell me. She still dips snuff late at night. And she's, she can't see good. And apparently Bruton snuff is like any other narcotic. The more you take, the more you need. And I remember Mama getting a little pinch of snuff when she was a younger woman, and now it's like one of them scoops they use to get horse feed. And she gets a big old mouthful of snuff, and she always misses a little bit. Because the human mouth is not made to accept that much snuff. I would never say this if I thought she would ever see this. And so she's always got the telltale Bruton, you know, and it can be dusted off too, you know. So I've just taken to going like that, and she's fine. But the thing about Mom is, I'm not allowed in the kitchen. I've never been allowed in the kitchen. She will let me stand a few paces away from the stove and talk to her. But I had to figure all this stuff out by sitting knee to knee to her, not watching her cook, but sitting knee to knee to her and saying, "What do you do then? What do you do then?" And even then it was hell, because how much flour do you use? Enough, some. You know, how long do you cook it? Till it's done. How do you know? Well, you just do. Or my favorite, well, you can listen. Like baked beans. You know baked beans are done when you hear that the bacon on top, which is a lattice work of thick cut bacon, and there's this much pork fat floating on top of the baked beans. That's when you know it's done, when not only does it smell delicious, but you can actually hear the bacon, right, fry on top. And but she was not really for this book. And I told her, I said, "Mama, we might ought to go ahead and write this book, because you may need another house." Okay.